Okay, so let's jump right in. Have you ever thought about this? What if a huge, prophesied event, something that was supposed to change the world, was meant to happen centuries ago, but it didn't? It got derailed, and not by fate, but by human failure. Well, today we're going to unpack a really powerful argument that says exactly that history literally went off script, and more importantly, what that means for us, right now.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the promise that was delayed. Then, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the historical tests that were, failed. After that, we'll decode the whole philosophy behind these tests, and then, and this is the really fascinating part, we'll dive deep into a case study of psychological warfare. Finally, we'll tie it all together to see what the big lesson is for us today.
Okay, let's get into it. The whole argument we're looking at today really kicks off with this one central problem, a huge prophecy that just didn't happen when it was supposed to. So let's dig in and figure out why.
And really, this is the core question that drives everything else. We're not talking about some vague, it'll happen someday kind of delay. No, the source material argues that a specific, scheduled event was completely thrown off course. So the big question is, what on earth happened?
And here's the answer, and it's a pretty provocative one. The claim is that history was supposed to have this major pivot, a huge turning point, all the way back in the time of Imam Hussein, that he was supposed to be the figure, but something went profoundly, terribly wrong.
So, okay, if something went wrong, what was it? The explanation we're given here isn't about random chance or some kind of predestined fate. Nope. It all comes down to a series of, failed human tests at some really critical moments in history.
All right, take a look at this. This slide is a perfect illustration of that first major failure. We're talking about the people of Kufa. They promised everything. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, the whole shebang. But then, when it was actually time to act, all those promises just, poof, evaporated. They folded under political pressure and a whole lot of propaganda.
And this number, it's just staggering. Just try to wrap your head around it. You have a force of maybe 20,000 supporters, and it just melts away until only 50 people are left standing. This source really hammers this point home to show just how devastatingly effective psychological warfare can be. A few rumors about an army on the way, some promises of money, and that was it.
And get this, it wasn't just a one-time thing. The argument is that there was a second chance, generations later, during the time of Imam Sadiq. But this time, the failure was different. It wasn't about a lack of resolve. Instead, the source calls it intelligence failures. Basically, plans got leaked and they lost the element of surprise. So you have two different tests at two different times, but the result? Same story. Failure.
Okay, so all this talk about tests, it kind of brings up a really fundamental question, right? What do we even mean by a divine test? If history is just one big series of exams, what's the point of it all? Let's try and decode the logic behind this.
So here's the thinking. These tests, they aren't for God's benefit. He already knows the outcome, right? No, they're for our benefit. Think of it like a final exam in school. The teacher already knows who studied and who didn't. The exam is for the students so they can prove to themselves and to everyone else that they've actually mastered the material.
And to make this idea less abstract, the source uses this really powerful metaphor. The argument goes like this. Whenever you see a story in Scripture about a test involving water, like with the people of Thamud or the army of Talut, it's not really just about being thirsty. It's actually a symbolic test, a test of loyalty to leadership, or what's known as wilayat.
And this is such a brilliant way to illustrate the whole concept, right? History is basically presented as this constant choice between two kinds of water. Are you going to drink the sweet, pure water of just and divine leadership, or are you going to go for the salty, bitter water of corrupt and tyrannical rule? That choice, that recurring test of wilayat, that's the theme that keeps popping up over and over again.
So if these tests are all about leadership and loyalty, what does one actually look like up close? Well, the source gives us this incredibly detailed case study that it calls the ultimate blueprint. We're talking about the fitna, or sedition, that surrounded the death of the third caliph, Uthman.
So the stage is set with all this simmering public discontent, and the speaker points to these little details, like this one, a cloak that was worth 0.5 kilogram of gold. Things like that were used to paint this picture of excessive wealth, which, as you can imagine, fueled a lot of popular anger and basically made the population ripe for manipulation.
And here's the crazy part. A peaceful resolution was actually achieved. The protesters were literally on their way home. But then comes this perfectly timed piece of disinformation. A messenger gets caught, a hidden letter is found, and what's in it? What looks like a death warrant for the very people who just made peace. I mean, you couldn't design something for maximum outrage any better than that.
And this is where the deception was so genius and so diabolical. Uthman himself says, yeah, the seal is mine, but that's not my handwriting. Now remember, this is an age without any kind of forensic analysis, so who do you believe? It just creates this incredibly thick cloud of confusion and distrust where nobody can see clearly. And that, according to the source, is the very essence of a fitna.
So after the crisis totally explodes and Uthman is killed, the manipulation just goes into overdrive. The source explains how Muawiyah, who was the governor of Syria at the time, just masterfully uses these incredibly potent emotional symbols, like the bloody shirt, the severed fingers of Uthman's wife, and he uses them to craft this simple, powerful, and totally false narrative: Ali is to blame. And he just repeated that narrative over and over and over again.
Okay, so you might be thinking, why are we spending so much time on this one complex ancient event? Well, because according to this whole argument, it's not just history. It's a warning. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important lesson of all.
The core argument here is that this event isn't just a history lesson. It's more like a field manual, a playbook. It shows you step by step exactly how a society can be torn apart by disinformation, by emotional manipulation, and by what we would today call media campaigns that just create confusion and assign false blame. The point is, to pass the test today, you have to be able to recognize the playbook for this kind of fitna when you see it.
And this is where everything pivots to the present day. The claim is that the rules of the game have changed. See, in the past, a leader would show up, and then the community would be tested. But now the community has to pass the test first. It has to prove its resilience to propaganda, prove its unity before that leadership even arrives. The burden of proof, it's shifted. It's on us now.
And that really brings us to the final thought. The speaker isn't just telling us these historical events as stories. They're being presented as, well, as old exam papers from a test that humanity has failed before. And the argument is that the same questions are going to be on the test again. Questions about loyalty, about disinformation, about leadership. So the real question, the one we're left with, is this: will the answers be any different this time?